So hi, welcome to this episode of History Hunters. I'm at the San Joaquin Catholic Cemetery in Stockton, California, to sing the praises of a hero, a young man. Seems like young people are always the brave ones. A young man who selflessly ran into danger back in 1902 when Stockton was facing one of its great fire tragedies. It was the old Pavilion fire. Unfortunately, Thomas J. Walsh did not survive the injuries that he sustained during that 1902 blaze. I'm going to take you to his grave and also the site where it happened and talk to you about it on this episode of History Hunters. So you'll find the grave of firefighter Thomas J. Walsh right here, this giant marker here. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to remove this silk flower wreath here to show you what it talks about. Somebody placed a hook on it. There it is, the marker for Thomas J. Walsh, erected by the citizens of Stockton. And you'll see right there, that's an actual engraving that represents his final moments as he took his horse-drawn fire apparatus to the burning Pavilion fire, September 1902, and you'll see it in the background. He was born at Stockton on August 25th, 1872, and he died September 30th, 1902. That was the day after the fire. Died of injuries received while heroically performing his duties as a fireman at the Great Pavilion conflagration. What a horrible thing to happen to such a young, brave man. Walsh was 30. He was a hose wagon driver for Engine Company 2. He drove so close to the fire, fell from his seat overcome by the intense heat. When a rescue party carried him out, he was horribly burned. The wagon, the hose, and the horse all perished in the fire. Now, strangely, there's a torch with fire on the site here. A great number of people came out here for his funeral. That was such a horrendous fire. The pavilion was the pride and joy of Stockton.
Stockton hosted its first fair in 1857. Part of the 1884 fair was canceled when the Fair Association was unable to find a large hall for an exhibit. After the pavilion exhibit was canceled again the following year, the fair president pushed for construction of an ag pavilion. The society raised $20,000 by selling life memberships at $50 apiece. A local architect was hired to design a 38,400 square foot pavilion building with 4 wings of 80 feet by 100 feet. It would be constructed directly south of St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church, bounded by Washington, Hunter, San Joaquin, and Lafayette streets. The site is now occupied by the Crosstown Freeway. Construction on the wood and glass pavilion commenced on May 10, 1887, and with 100 men on the crew, was completed in September. Total construction of the building cost $40,939. When the fair opened that year, there was a cabin built inside the Grand Pavilion featuring watermelons, nearby Lodi's most famous crop. The fair at its grand building was a success for the next 15 years. The 1902 fair had just finished its first week of festivities when disaster struck. At 5:05 p.m. on Sunday, September 28, 1902, a fire started inside the closed building, possibly caused by a gas leak accidentally ignited when a worker lit a match and an explosion occurred. The massive fire spread to nearby homes and buildings to the south and southeast. A total of 68 families became homeless. In the early morning of September 29, 1902, crowds flocked to the scene and were aghast to see only charred, twisted metal and rubble. Among those who were shaken by the fire experience was California Secretary of State Charles F. Curry, who happened to be in Stockton. It is said that the future congressman tried to assist those who were battling the fire. On the rear of the fire wagon was Ed Knowles, who called Walsh to stop but could not hear because of the roaring fire. Knowles, who was also overcome by the smoke and flames, was unconscious for several days but survived. Unconscious nearly all the time from his rescue until his death, Thomas Walsh was bandaged at the hospital and later moved to his parents' home on West Oak Street, where he died at 6 a.m. the next morning. His foolhardy but heroic drive through the sea of flames would never be forgotten by those who witnessed the terrible attempt.
So back in 1902, Hunter Street here went all the way through. I think they've created some kind of civic center down there. But firefighter Walsh would have come right down through here with his primitive fire wagon. It's hard to believe that in those days they used to have horse-drawn carriages to fight fires. And I'm going to walk down here and show you where the Ag Pavilion was. So as I explained earlier, Hunter Street went right through here. Obviously back in 1902, there was no freeway here. This is the Crosstown Freeway, or number 4, that went right over the site where the Ag Pavilion was. The Ag Pavilion was right over here. It is really hard to believe that that was a park at one time after the Ag Pavilion burned to the ground. And I have to show you this. This is St. Mary's Catholic Church. This is where Thomas Walsh's funeral was. And fortunately, they have a plaque up here. St. Mary's Catholic Church, the first Archbishop Joseph Alamy laid the cornerstone July 21st, 1861. The first Mass was celebrated Christmas Eve on the same year, 1870. The facade dates back to 1893. So I came across the street to get a better view of the St. Mary's Catholic Church. It is such an impressive structure. Just think, right across the street was the great Ag Pavilion. And afterwards, there was a park here, and I do believe that these palm trees date back to the time in which it was here. I believe the Crosstown Freeway was built through here in the 1960s, which completely changed the entire flavor of downtown. This church has such ornate features you will never see in a church today. I mean, check it out. Very Gothic looking. Great windows. I think people were more spiritually connected back then. As I have often said, if these walls could talk, this building stood great witness to what happened across the street there. And a lot of people don't even know about the Ag Pavilion today. Pretty amazing Catholic church. Look at those bricks. Very, very old. Unfortunately, this area is ground zero for the homeless of Stockton. They've built a homeless encampment underneath the freeway, and I'm going to go under here just to show you what it looks like down here. It is really difficult to believe that the Ag Pavilion was sitting here right where the Crosstown Freeway is. Now, the reason I'm coming right over here is because this is the location where Thomas Walsh died with his horse, right here on this corner. This is now the parking lot for the police department, because the police station is not very far away from here, but this is where Hunter Street came right through here. Thomas Walsh's last ride was right through here. I'm going to come across the street and give you a better understanding of what happened that day. So we are at the corner of Lafayette and Hunter. And the instructions for Walsh were to bring his wagon straight down South Street. Now, if you can imagine, the Ag Pavilion was on fire right there. Just huge, massive fire. Captain Carroll signaled for him to continue down this street here because the flames were whipping across the road here. Well, Walsh could not hear the instruction, and he made the turn right here with his horse. And unfortunately, he was overcome by the intense heat. They made it down to this corner down here, but the horse passed away. In fact, there are pictures of the horse that's dead out, very singed horse out here. It's really hard to believe that this less than desirable area of Stockton was a beautiful location at one time. So the horse did its best to rush along Lafayette Street here, but shied away and dropped right there on the corner. That poor horse. I understand that the wagon actually hit a tree, and that's what both the firemen and the horse were overcome by the heat and flames. So it was right here where Mr. Walsh met his fate, 30 years old. Now, he did his best to free the horse from the reins and all that, but it was too late. In fact, Mr. Walsh was overcome by the flames himself. Some bystanders tried to rush up to him and pull off the burning clothes, pull him to safety, but he did not survive. The picture would have been right here. I really can't think of a worse way to die than being burned to death. Poor Mr. Walsh. Now, Walsh has this very nice monument right here, but I understand this is his sister, Julia, lived 1878 to 1950, and sadly, this marker for his parents, Thomas Walsh, died, it looks like 3 years after his son, and then Morris Walsh, I believe, is another son, and there's a Julia Walsh. I just spoke to one of the caretakers, and he was telling me that he thinks this place is haunted. He actually saw me out of the corner of his eye, and he thought that I was a ghost, so he stopped his little electric cart and pulled over and talked to me, and I was told that I was doing a video on Mr. Walsh here. But he was also telling me that he's been in that mausoleum at night back there, and some really spooky things that happened to him, that he's convinced that there's ghosts. So I think I'm gonna put this back here on this marker and let that be. I was kind of attracted to this grave here because it's right on the edge of the cemetery, and you know that back then this was a rural part of Stockton. I mean, it was out in the sticks, and now it's been surrounded by city, but check it out. It's the grave of Mary Conway. Mary Conway died in 1869. She was 35. She was from the parish of Lisgold, County, Cork, Ireland, and also her infant son. Looked like they died less than a month apart. Probably were ill. It's really sad to think that a lot of people who had things that modern medicine could save, back then couldn't save because they didn't have the technology. And I'm sure they came out here to California in search of riches, because California was a mecca for gold mining. A lot of Irish immigrants came over here to mine. So what I think I'm going to do right now is head over to the Stockton Rural Cemetery, which is neighboring to this cemetery, and we'll find some graves of some other heroic firefighters who gave their lives here in Stockton. So I've driven over here to the Stockton Rural Cemetery, which is a cemetery that's not rural anymore because the city has completely enveloped it. This is a monument here to firefighters, and a lot of firefighters are buried here. Not necessarily firefighters who died in the line of duty, but they served in Eureka Company number 2, which was a company here in Stockton. 20 or so firefighters buried right here, including that of A.B. Bennett, died in 1899. Check out that very cool fireman's cap, Eureka number 2. It's been out here well over 100 years, and the stone is still pretty good shape. There's a gentleman over here I want to talk to you about. He's buried away from the other firefighters. Jack Pierce. John Pierce, or Jack Pierce. He was born in Philadelphia, PA, 1852, and he died July 22nd, 1886, as a member of the Weber Engine Company, he was thrown from the hose cart while responding to a fire, and he died in the line of service. Right down here is a marker. It says Stockton Fire Department. They gave him a special marker here on the ground. Right over there's the rail yard that you're hearing. So right over here in this section of the Stockton Rural Cemetery is the Vent family plot. There are a number of vents here, but I want to focus on this guy right here. It was Stockton firefighter Alexander S. Vent. He was born in 1882. I believe he died at the age of 36. He was responding to a fire on the 4th of July 1918, and unfortunately he was electrocuted. And I'm assuming that individual next to him, Edwin Vent, might be his son. Died in 1963. And over here I believe there's a Robert Vent. Now thankfully, firefighter safety has greatly improved since the days of firefighter Vent. There are precautions that are taken, different procedures that are taken, and the incident of firefighter deaths have been greatly diminished. Unfortunately, a lot of the deaths these days are caused by inhaling of toxic fumes fighting fires. So I think that's going to wrap up this episode of History Hunters. We would always appreciate hearing what you thought about our video. If you could give us a like, we would also appreciate that as well. If you could also tell your friends about History Hunters, we would also appreciate that. Thank you so much.